I gotta say, in this little tin box, every part that you need is in there. All the supplies are needed to build a replica. I know you're having a little trouble seeing it since it was up there, but if you look at those pieces, I'm telling you that you have all the supplies you need to make the replica. How are you going to do? Why do you need to make a model? How are you going to do with this? Oh, you don't even know what it's supposed to look like. Okay. So that would probably be helpful for someone to come along who knows what the real thing looks like to then say, let me tell you how to make it. Now, this is just simply a copy of it, but it's not really the real thing. And I'll tell you that if we did, well, I'll tell you, it's the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. I don't know about you, but I don't think all of us are going to fit onto this Millennium Falcon if we wanted to travel through space. Now, if the real thing was in front of us, honestly, I'd say probably pitch this and let's get onto the real Millennium Falcon, because that'd be pretty awesome what it is. But we have this challenge getting to see the beautiful thing of a replica of a model, but making sure that we're not stuck on just the replica when the real thing is before us. And here, we have that challenge. There are some amazing replicas out there. As I was getting to go through the Lego aisle, this was the cheapest Lego they had anymore, $5. Some of those replicas, man, they're beautiful, but I know it's also cheaper than buying the Eiffel Tower, so, maybe I can get the Lego replica. But, man, replicas of these things are fun, and I got, in these books, they got those, printed out manuscripts of what the real manuscript looks like. It could be life size. We talk about that with, what was that? Oh, man, National Treasure, when they have the copies in the hall of the Declaration of Independence. That's a replica, but the real deal, you're talking about a whole different thing here. I know sometimes when you're doing legal stuff, they don't want a copy of your marriage certificate or birth certificate. You gotta have the actual seal. Painting, same thing. The copy doesn't honestly compete with the authentic. It serves a purpose, and it can be a good reminder for us. Or some cherished memories of Paris, or whatever it is. It does its purpose. But the copy versus the real doesn't compete with the authentic. So when it comes to how we live, though, do you get stuck on making a copy of something? Or do you want to experience the real thing? Last week, we got to go through this comparison of Jesus' priesthood in comparison to Abraham and the Levitical priest. Guys, the VBS, man, that feels like forever ago when we talked about this last sermon. But last week, we went through looking at the priesthood of Melchizedek and how even Abraham had offered tithes to Melchizedek. And that's saying something. It is for all the Levitical priests through Grandpa to also give tithes to Melchizedek. That's saying something about Melchizedek's priesthood. Melchizedek didn't have necessarily a written down date of when he was born, a date when he died, or his mother and father. It wasn't a genealogical thing. It didn't matter. Because in the picture, Melchizedek's priesthood was kind of like forever. And Jesus follows that. So we got to see that amazing comparison that Jesus' priesthood is greater than Abraham and the Levitical priest. But having established Jesus' greatness as priest, how great his priesthood is, the author of Hebrews gets to his main point now. And he wants to see Jesus' superior priesthood in his office, the office of priesthood, that ministry. And so we'll look at these three. If you go back one more slide, the covenant, sanctuary, and sacrifice. That's what the Levitical priests had, right? In their model, they had the covenant that they were living out. They had the sanctuary that they got to go to. They got to offer the sacrifices. And then, in comparison now to Jesus, we're going to look at that. So we come to the main point of this section. Now that we are saying all this, we have a high priest. This is that high priest. one who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven. No Levitical priests have done that. They can't. He's a minister in the holy places, in the true tent that the Lord set up, not by man. For every high priest is appointed to offer gifts and sacrifices. Like that's what a priest does. They offer sacrifices and gifts. So thus, it is necessary for any priest to have something to offer. Does Jesus have anything to offer? He has indeed. But we get to this point where he says, now if Jesus were on earth, Jesus wouldn't be a priest. If Jesus was on earth, he wouldn't be a priest. Why? I'm glad I got somebody thinking. It's not me thinking, it's exactly what he's saying. If Jesus was on earth, he wouldn't be a priest. Why? He's not from the tribe of Levi. He couldn't be a Levitical priest. It's impossible for him to be a priest. He's from Judah. He doesn't meet the qualifications to be a priest. In the temple and tabernacle that they had in the old covenant. So God had to establish the new covenant, a better covenant, of the real authentic temple that Jesus now resides in as high priest. That's who we have as such a high priest as this. Because you see, the temple that they had, the tangible one that they could see, was simply just a copy, a shadow that we could see of the honest heavenly things. Remember when I asked you if you could make the model of this without me telling you what this was supposed to be, would you be able to do it? If you've never seen a picture of a temple before, would you be able to make a copy of God's temple? No. So comes along Moses, when he was about to erect the tabernacle, he was instructed by God saying, see that you make everything according to the pattern that was shown you on the mountain. You are your guide to build the replica of what is actually taking place in heaven. So if you were to serve somewhere, where would you want to serve? Again, if I built this Millennium Falcon and we all try to get on this thing, it's not going to do us any good. What's going to be far superior is the real authentic thing. What Moses and the Levitical priest had was good. It was a replica. It was a reminder of what God was doing. It served its purpose. But in light of the real authentic thing, we've got something better. So let's look. We just keep that side up. Currently, yes, we do indeed have this high priest, seated with God in heaven, in his presence, in the Holy of Holies, which, again, the Levitical priest, the high priest, had offered his own sacrifices. He was sin before. He had his own weaknesses. He had offered his own sacrifices first before he entered into the presence of God, lest being struck down. And that's what they had to do to be able to be in God's presence, in the Holy of Holies. Jesus utterly in the presence of God, completely. In the heavenly tabernacle, in the heavenly throne. Again, this is challenging you guys. This is challenging all of us. And I guess I'll go ahead and tell you this reminder. Just because my wife says something that I might not think is as important doesn't mean it's not important. Right? Just because I don't think it's not as important doesn't mean it's not important. And that's our challenge here. Whether you think this is important or not doesn't matter. Because this is the main point of what he's getting to. We have this high priest who we can be in the presence of God because of him. The only time we've ever been able to pray to God in that kind of relationship we have now with him is because of Jesus, our high priest. It's not in this temple that's made by us, a copycat of the authentic, real heavenly realm. So the point emphasized in verse 2 is that the possibility of access to God through a Levitical and earthly arrangement no longer exists because of their intrinsic inadequacy. Acts access is possible only through the ministering priests who serve in the heavenly sanctuary. We've got our driver's license. The old one gets replaced by the new. They put a thing on there if I drive around and with my old one, not the new, and the cop pulls me over. I'm sorry, officer, I've got my old one. And that's not valid. What used to work is no longer in service. God has brought in the best thing now. So the appointed priest, we were talking about that. There would be no room for the Levitical priesthood for Jesus to live in that family business through the Levites. Moses was instructed to make that copy. We talked about how the temple on earth was a copycat shadow of the true temple in heaven. I could understand why Jews would be hesitant to worship Jesus as high priest. Because again, he's not in the Levitical order. Here on earth, he's got no room to be in that room. But when God of all people has established Jesus as high priest in the temple by promise and oath, that declaration holds. F.F. Bruce has said, look, to our author, this simply emphasizes the dignity of Jesus' high priesthood. For a high priesthood exercised in an earthly shrine is far inferior to that heavenly high priesthood which depends for its exercise on a perfect sacrifice offered once for all. In consequent admission to the sanctuary above, it is then and no earthly replica of the heavenly dwelling place of God that Jesus ministers as his people's high priest. That's not where he serves. He serves instead in the heavenly dwelling place itself. His ministry, accordingly, is far superior to any earthly ministry. That's probably the big challenge I've got from this chapter. We like to build things and to establish our own things. And sure, it's fun to sit down and build our own little replica of models and stuff. But do not get stuck on making a replica of what God has already established. Jesus is actively ministering as high priest, making the way for all to come to God, who come to through him. So Hebrews goes on to say in verse 6, but as it is, Christ has obtained a ministry that is so much more excellent than the old. Simply even because the covenant he mediates is better, since it is enacted on better promises. Sometimes there's people that love to replace things just for the sake of replacing them. And then you ask them, well, what's wrong with the old one? They're like, oh, nothing, I just want the new thing. He's saying here, look, if the first covenant had been faultless with no issues, there would have been no occasion to look for a second, a better one. But because there was something lacking, they kept looking for what was to come. Jesus' ministry is superior even because of the better covenant which Jesus mediates for us. Bruce went on to say, the covenant of which Jesus is mediator may be inferred to be a better covenant simply because, yeah, sure, it's new. Hopefully new is better. That's what we always hope for. But the big thing is, if the old covenant had been perfect, it would not have required to be superseded by a new one. And the new one must be better, for there would have been no point in replacing the old covenant by another, no better than itself, costing Jesus' own blood, his own sacrifice of a perfect life for us. Why it wouldn't be necessary except if the first one had done its job. So when Jesus enters into God's heavenly temple as our eternal high priest now and forever, we see that his entrance into the heavenly sanctuary guarantees God's acceptance of his sacrifice. Jesus, welcome to the temple, where you serve as high priest. I appoint you here. And the actualization of the provisions of the superior covenant he mediated. The new covenant is superior because it is based on better promises. They knew it was coming. In Jeremiah, they received the warning. And we got to look at that when we were in the covenant series. So I'll share it again, because they knew it too. They lived up to this day. Many of you have dreams, and you look to those dreams often. This was that dream that they knew, and they recollect often. There was that fault in the first, because it's whenever he had told the people, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of both Israel north and with the house of Judah south. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all of them after, but on the day when I took them out by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. Remember that covenant? Okay. They didn't continue in my covenant. And I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. They broke the covenant. But here is a new covenant that I'm establishing. For this is the new covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds, and I will write them into their hearts. Sounds similar to Ephesians 7 this morning. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, know the Lord, and they shall all know me. It is available to all, from the least of them to the greatest. Draw near to me. For I will be merciful toward their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more. Three main things of this new covenant: the implementing of God's law in their hearts and their mind, the knowledge of God as a matter of personal experience. Draw near. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. That's the whole way to the Father. Draw near. I've made the way. This is the new covenant. And blotting out our sins, their sins that I will remember no more. Forgive me, Savior. Draw near, knowing God. This is that new covenantal relationship that we have. We live with God because Jesus is ministering and mediating this new and better covenant as our eternal high priest king, making this covenant possible. So in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. The old has done its job through Moses and Levitical priests in the temple of old. But now the new has made the old obsolete. Jesus has fulfilled those purposes of the old covenant. And he has established the new covenant, the new ministry, in the authentic and best eternal temple of God's kingdom, which everything else was just pointing to as a foreshadow. You think this is great? Let's maybe think about the Paris Lego, I guess. Then you think that one's great. Look at the actual Paris Eiffel Tower. It'd be way better. So, we are concluding. We're challenged. Because you're probably asking maybe the same arguments. Thank you. But, what? I think the first question, if you skip to 2 slides, why would you stay stuck on a mere replica when Jesus is now serving in the real heavenly temple? First question. Since we are concluding, I do want to at this point. Because as I said, if we're going to follow Jesus as high priest, we need to know that he's authentically high priest, right? That's why our author has gone through that to establish this indeed is the true high priest. He's valid. Indeed, he is the true high priest. He had entered into the true temple on our behalf. The old temple was good, yes. The new, though, the real one is better. The old priests were good, yes, but the new priest is better. The old covenant was good, yes, but the new one is better, established on better promises. Jesus has shown to be the eternal high priest, ministering from heaven in true tabernacle and enacting the better promises and the covenant. So, when it comes to how we live, do we find ourselves trying to make a replica of what God has already established? Silly me, I thought I had that on the slide. I'll ask it again. When it comes to how we live, do we find ourselves trying to make a replica of what God has already established? Because nothing we can build will compete with what he has already established. Will compete with the ministry of our eternal high priest Jesus. We can't make a copy of this ourselves. So I guess there's the slide. Are you stuck at trying to build a replica? Or are you living in what God has already established in Jesus, our high priest, because in the authentic heavenly temple of God? That's a lot. That's a mouthful there. That's the best way I can phrase all of that we've captured so far. And I think maybe I've been reminded because Bob Russell, he's got that book that I've been sitting on the shelf for however long. It's called When God Builds a Church. When God builds a church, not when we are trying to do all that stuff, but when God builds a church. When God has already established what he has established with Jesus being the best minister we could ever have. Why are we trying to build a copycat of it? I need you to come to Jesus, your high priest. To draw near to God. Because Jesus has made that way through a better covenant. Better than us ever going to a Levitical priest, better than coming to me ever. You've got the best thing. Don't just rely on the elders or whoever to be your replica. And I kept asking this question. I just want to see it more practically, right? Thank you, Daryl, for sharing all of this insightful, heavenly stuff that's up there in the sky, in the clouds. Is that right? That's where our heads are at. It's just in the clouds. And every single time I kept asking that question, that was a heartbreaking thing. Just because it's not tangible, does that mean it's not practical? Just because you can't see it, does that mean it's not practical? We were talking about electricity this morning. That was actually going to be one of my examples. That just because I can't see the electric currents happening, we get to see the fruit of what happens. We know it's taking place, but we take it for granted. I got to listen to Alan share all this stuff of even the capacity and being overloaded and how they have to have more to be able to generate this. And I'm like, can I just flip the switch? Take it for granted. Just because it's not tangible doesn't mean it's not practical. Just because you don't tangibly see a bunch of file cabinets, records, CDs, and DVDs doesn't mean the memory space of data on the online cloud isn't practical. Because we can store more on there than we've ever been able to store in any kind of church building itself. I can't imagine trying to find a space in my house to store everything I store online. Just because it's not tangible doesn't mean it's not practical. Because it's what's actually taking place behind the scenes that makes everything else possible. So just like seeing the outcome of this electricity, knowing Jesus is doing his actual ministry right now leaves us in gratitude and in trust and hope of what he has already established. That we get to follow his lead, what he is doing in all of our lives and his communities around everywhere as he has established his kingdom. all get to go to Jesus, our high priest. So if we would apply it, you don't have to try to become more forgiven. God has established that through Jesus' sacrifice. You don't have to try to make Jesus real through more knowledge. He's already established. Currently, right now, serving in the temple. Thank you, Jesus. We don't have to try to make a stronger faith, because Jesus has established faith through God's promised covenant. He's made the way. Come to Him through Jesus. As we close, you don't need to make spiritual replicas of something that already exists. We get to follow and trust Jesus as our high priest, who is mediating, ministering the new covenantal relationship God has established with us. So we have the best of the best. Do you trust what God has established even if you don't understand it? Come to our high priest even when you don't understand. Do you believe that Jesus as our high priest has established this new covenantal relationship with us? Guiding us as He knows us, as we get to know Him, as He has forgiven us. And are we living as though the new covenant is really in place through Jesus? Since Jesus has the better ministry of the better covenant, we get to leave on that simple note. Draw near to God. That our high priest has made the way. Today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts. God, we thank you for what you have established. That it is set in stone, that it is the best ministry humanity has ever seen. That you have reached all of us that are in this room now, all with our families, and that you are reaching our neighbors, and that may mean, especially through your disciples. As we get to look not at a replica that we try to build on our own, that we look to the real temple, the real high priest, who is well established beyond us. So God, we thank you in gratitude for our firm foundation of our high priest and King. We trust you with what you are doing, especially when it doesn't make sense. Now we get to draw near to you through our high priest. Now we get to live in hope. Knowing that your power, God, far exceeds anything that we can do on our own. And now we get to be vessels of your Spirit wherever we go, sharing your word of life through all stages of life. Jesus' good and holy, precious name. Amen.
Thank you for your faithfulness and attendance, sharing this encouragement with us. Daryl, thanks for the message. We hillbillies have a saying, it says, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it was broken. The old covenant was only temporary, and it could never do what Christ did. I want you to imagine with me for a second the worst of all scenarios. You've been to the doctor and he said, you have cancer. You have cancer. And you can go to a doctor and you can get radiation treatments, but they can never get rid of the disease. They're just treating the symptoms. But then what if you could go to a doctor and he completely wipes out the symptoms? Your cancer's gone. You're cancer-free. Which would you choose? You'd choose the better covenant. You'd choose Christ. And that's who we need to choose to live our lives.